All right, so we'll keep going with our design. This will be the last lesson in our design part of this course. So we'll just kind of do some environment fixes, add some depth to our scene, and also do some final touches before we get into texturing and rendering. So we'll hop into Cinema and get started with that. So the first thing that we can do is actually make sure that we make all of our objects visible within our objects panel again, since we're not doing animation or posting right now. So we'll go ahead and unhide these and unlock all of them. To just quickly fold all of these together, you can just right click here and select fold all, and that will just fold everything together so we don't have this visual mess going on here. So I kind of want this clean and nice infinite background where we'll basically just be having a single colored environment. And a really good way of doing this is just kind of extending the ground plane that we have up behind our character and kind of just scale everything to a massive proportion. But that will give us nice even lighting in the background and just a nice solid color. So we'll hop out to our perspective view and we'll go ahead and add a bend deformer to our plane here. So I'll come over here to our deformers panel, click bend. I'll drag it and drop it into our plane, and I'll make sure to set it to X plus and set fit to parent. And if you start to bend it, you'll see what kind of happens right now. So we'll probably want to bend it like somewhere around minus 20 degrees, but I'll go ahead and rotate it, of course. And we'll also go ahead and kind of pull it back behind our character, and we can go ahead and scale the bend down because we don't need it to be that big. And while we're doing this, we can actually open up our split 4 view just so we can see what this is doing to our composition. So we can obviously go ahead and bend this just a bit more upwards. And I'll also just go ahead and take a look at our line view. I think we can add a bit more segments to our plane because right now it's just around 10. So I'll just set this to 50 just so we get an even bend and not any harsh edges around here. And I'll just go ahead and bend it up just a bit more, something like that. Great. And as you can tell, the ground plane doesn't really extend out to the edge of our camera. So we'll need to scale this up, but I don't want to scale the bend up. I still want the bend to be at the same place as we have it right now. So an easy way of doing that is just to drag our bend outside of our plane, but within our ground null. And now I can still individually move around our plane, but the bend stays in place. So that's perfect. So I'll just go ahead and select our scale tool and I'll drag it all the way until it extends to our camera. So it doesn't really matter how big this gets. We just want it to extend all the way out so we don't see any empty space below the ground. And with that, I see that we can kind of readjust our camera position. So I'll just kind of shift this so it feels like she's more in the middle. Might even want to rotate it down a bit now, so maybe at 0.9. We're just making very incremental changes right now. But since we have such a long lens, these changes will do a lot. By the way, I did find the doodle tool. It's right here. So if you activate it, you can go ahead and draw. And as you might remember from my drawing, I had these like bushes and stones and stuff in front and behind my character. I think this could be a really nice way just to kind of, add some depth into our scene without adding just too much detail. And putting things in front and behind a subject always gives a better sense of depth to your composition. So we can go ahead and do that. So I'll just delete this ugly doodle, just so we don't have that obstructing our view. And yeah, I'm kind of seeing these like very chunky, cartoonish like plots of grass. And I think we can make them out of a sphere. So I'll go ahead and create a sphere from our primitives panel. And I'll scale it way down to probably somewhere around like 20 centimeters will do for now, something like that. I can also go ahead and increase the segments immediately to something around 32. And I'm kind of seeing this tapered look on these, but like very, very soft and balloony, but a bit stretched out. So when I usually create these, as always, I use myself of deformers just to keep things very modular and procedural, so we don't have to go back and like redo things if we want to change anything. But we can go ahead and add a taper to this sphere. So I'll come over to our deformers, we'll drag the taper into our sphere, set it to fit to parent, and I'll taper it quite a bit this time. So something around like 40%. And I'll want to do the same to the bottom side of this sphere as well. So then I can actually duplicate this taper and rotate it 180 degrees in this direction. And now we kind of get this tapering on both sides. So this is kind of getting us closer, but I kind of want to stretch it out and smooth it out a bit more. So we can add another deformer called a squash and stretch deformer. And that does exactly as it sounds like. It squashes and stretches. But if I drag it into our sphere here, I will, like always, hit fit to parent. And I'll kind of drag this factor just to kind of show you what this does. So this of course squashes and stretches it. And I don't want to stretch it too much, but maybe somewhere along, maybe something along like 125% will do for us. And I think we can scale it down. It's a bit too big, I feel like. We will duplicate these and like create these nice, like fluffy plots of grass, but we don't want it that big. And let's also try and add a smoothing deformer, because that will kind of smooth out the overall shape and kind of give it less harsh definitions. So we can come over to our deformer panel once again, go down to smoothing and add that into our sphere. And again, it's important in what order you place these. If you would place the smoothing within our sphere, not much would happen because you would only be smoothing out the sphere. But we want the smoothing to be applicable on all of the previous deformers that we've added. So we'll add that. And then we can just go ahead and play around with the stiffness and see what sort of shape that we like here. I think I'm leaning more towards something like this. I just kind of try and duplicate this and see how this looks all together. Okay, yeah, this is definitely the type of shape that I want. So what we can do is we can group this like this, and I'll call this grass. And I can just move down the axis point. I'll hit L, so we have our axis mode enabled. And I'll just drag it down maybe like 10 centimeters, just so we can easily rotate the grass object from the axis that we want to rotate it from. So something like this works. And instead of creating like duplicates and having to edit each one, if we want to make a tiny change to the shape, we can, like with the fingers, we can use instances of this. So if I just come over here to this panel, we can have the grass selected and release on instance, and that will create an instance for us. And like with the fingers, now all of these deformers gets visible. So we can just hide all of them by holding in Alt and then just dragging along here. So now they're green, and if we do it again, they turn red like that. Great. And I'm kind of seeing that I'll grab both of these and set them into the ground like this. And once we've done that, we can kind of try and, create some cool compositions with these strands of grass like this and just kind of place them in interesting formations and stuff. And if you try and, for example, scale this grass instance, you can see now that it won't be possible. It won't be reacting to it. And that is because we need to go from model mode to object mode. And if we scale now, this will affect these scaling coordinates, which doesn't happen when you use model mode, but it does when you use object mode. So if I go ahead and scale this now, as you can tell, this will affect these scale coordinates. And if I want to scale, for example, this original grass object, this won't affect the scale of the instances because this is just a local coordinate. But if I were to scale the original grass, that would also scale the grass instance. So when we're working with instances and stuff, it's nice to just work in the object mode because then you can scale things individually and easily move things around. And yeah, as I said, I will kind of just try and place these in nice formations that I like. And this is kind of something that you will have to try out for yourself and see what you like. But feel free to follow along. I'll just kind of shift these around until I find something that I'm happy with. And if I want to add another instance, I'll just go ahead and copy the instance so we don't copy this one because we want everything to be linked back to this one in case we do want to change the shape, for example. So then that will affect all of the instances that we have. So yeah, as I said, I'll just go ahead and try and play around with these like grass formations like this. Kind of just... This is the hardest part about working in 3D or any like creative software, I feel like, just to create nice and good looking compositions. It's always tricky. It's hard to define what makes for a good visual, I feel like. It's so much about your own personal preference. But I'm kind of liking this kind of formation. And I'll I'll select all of them and see if I can rotate them together. Yeah, okay. Once I do have like this patch of grass that I like, I can actually just go ahead and group all of these together. So I'll group the original grass instance that I made, call this grass patch, and then I'll just drag all of these in here. And now I can just kind of rotate them all and kind of move them, and kind of just move them around, see what sort of placement would work. But this is feeling great. I'm really enjoying these like super soft shape, and they will look amazing once we start rendering. They will look really, really good. I'll call myself happy with this first grass patch, so I'll go ahead and create another one. And I can just go ahead and duplicate this grass patch that I just made. But I'm actually going to make sure to delete this non-instance grass patch, because the only grass model that I want in my scene that isn't an instance is the original one. So everything is linked back to the instances. So I don't want this non-instance grass patch. So I'll just delete that. And as you can tell, these instances go red, and that is just them saying, I don't know where my link went. Can you please redirect me to it? So if we just select all of them and just drag this original grass shape in here, now they go green and they're happy again, and now we can continue on with our design. And I'm kind of seeing that we want some form of grass patch maybe in front of her heel here. So this grass patch is placed behind her, so we want a grass patch placed in front of her as well. That's kind of what will give our illusion of depth. And I'll kind of just rotate this around. I'll go ahead and delete this one, and I'll go ahead and copy this one. Just rotate it like that. I'll change to our perspective view just so I see what I'm doing a bit better here. I still kind of want them to be this flat sort of 2D-ish shape, so we're not placing things, in front of each other and doing like that. I kind of want them to be this nice, simple illustrative shape. That's the kind of look that I'm trying to go for. Maybe scale down this one. Do that. Something like this. Yeah. I'll probably scale down all of them. So I'll select all three and just scale down like this. It's a roughly size where I'm happy with. And then I'll just go ahead and place this grass patch closer to her heel, maybe somewhere around there. Oh yeah, that's nice. Try and move it down. Might scale them down actually. Something like that. Yeah, that looks nice. We'll keep going. Since we have a few different formations now, we can actually just go ahead and build the next ones out of these. So I'm kind of seeing that we have some grass poking out behind the sword as well, and I think this little formation will fit well there. So I'll hop out to our perspective view and I'll hold control and drag it out. So I'll duplicate it and I'll place it somewhere around here, hop back into our camera view, and then try and kind of rotate it to a placement where it kind of fits, something like this, maybe. Might delete that one and then maybe rotate both of them out like that. No, you know what? I was happier with it before. The creative process. Okay, great. And I think we actually can scale these up a bit. I want this to feel a bit different to this one, and the composition would be a bit unbalanced if we have this massive piece of grass here and then just a small piece here. So I'll go ahead and scale both of these up, or all three actually, to something like that. That feels much better. And then I can actually go ahead and copy this one again. So I'll hop into our perspective view and just control drag this so it stands right in front of our sword, something like that. And obviously, maybe three of them will look a bit too uniform since we have three here already. So I'll just go ahead and delete one of them like that. Perfect. And I'll just go ahead and rotate these just a bit like that. Now they're actually colliding with the sword, so I'll just make sure that they don't do that. Okay, let's hop back into our camera view, see how this is looking. It's looking nice. Maybe something like that. Maybe not. I just don't want this like tiny little gap to poke out here, so I want to cover the part of the sword that does that, so we don't get any weird like tangents in our composition. But I think this feels good. I'm liking the composition that we have here. Perfect. And I mean, if we don't feel happy once we start lighting, because a lot of things can change with our perception of our scene, then we can just tweak things then. I mean, this is not set in stone just because we have moved on from this part of the process. So now with these like small patches of grass in a really good place, I think we can make our little like stones or pebbles that will be lying around the little place that she's standing at. So they will kind of wrap around the scene a bit here and then also be placed somewhere behind her. So we'll be using ourselves of a couple of different models and then also cloning them in pretty large amounts and using a random effector like we did before. So the first thing that we can do is actually just make the base model of our stone. So I can come out to our perspective view for this, and our stone model will be first made out of a sphere. So we'll go ahead and create a sphere, of course, and we'll scale it down quite a bit. And I can tell now that the scaling is working a bit differently just from the feel of the scale. And that is because we are in the object mode still. So I'll make sure that I'm in model mode. And that is just because we kind of want to change our radius and not our scale, because that will also affect our displacer when we place that in there, because we will be displacing these. So I'll just scale this down so we make sure that we're affecting the radius and not the scale coordinates. And I'll just drag it out somewhere along this line. And we'll want it to be pretty small, but I'll want to increase these segments just a bit, maybe actually around 24. And we'll go ahead and add a displacer. So we'll come into our deformers, go down to displacer, add it to our sphere, and we'll go into shading like we did with our displacer for our poncho. And we'll add a noise like that time as well. And now it's basically gonna obliterate our sphere. So I'll just set this to 1 for now. And while we're doing this, I'll actually go ahead and change our clipping again, because as you can tell, it's clipped since we are so close to the object now compared to in the camera angle. Things are getting unnecessarily clipped. So I'll just go ahead and press Command D, go to display, and change this to large instead. I think that will be enough. And now let's go into the shading of our noise. So we'll actually be selecting another type of noise here. And if you press this arrow, you can actually preview how these look. And I'm going to use myself of a Voronoi 1, which is a type of noise pattern basically. And this is the kind of noise that will sort of mimic the displacement of a very illustrative rock. And it doesn't really show that much right now because we need to add a few more segments, I think. And I also think that we need to scale down the global scale of our noise. So I'll just try and drag this global scale thing here. And now we can kind of see what it's doing. So I probably want it to stay around somewhere, maybe like 50%. And then we can play around with this random seed. So if we just switch this around, different kind of noise formations will happen. But this is, I'm kind of liking the shape that we just got on seed 667. But we still have some jagged edges. So to solve that, we can just drop our sphere into a subdivision surface. So I'll just have the sphere selected, hold Alt, and then click subdivision surface. So now we're getting a bit more of a better smoothing here. But since I'll just turn on the lines here so I can show you what is happening. Since we are working with the sphere with this kind of geometry formation, we're getting some pinching here at the top. And if you change the sphere type to, for example, icosahedron, that will kind of change the distribution of faces along the sphere. And this is a lot more even, which makes for better topology when you're working. This is actually a bit messed up, but let's try, for example, hexahedron instead. Yeah, okay, great. So now we can actually just kind of zoom out and take a look at this rock. I do like the shape of it. And since it's so easy to create, we can just create one more variation. So we can tell the cloner to distribute 2 different copies of the stone and not just one, because that will look a bit too uniform, I think. So I'll just control drag this one out. I'll go into our displacer, head into noise, and then I'll change around the seed for this one as well and just kind of see what sort of shape I land on. So I'll just fiddle these around. Oh yeah, this is a nice one. Perfect. So these shapes are slightly different, which is kind of what I want. So I ended up on seed 676 for this one. Now, once we have these, we can just go ahead and collapse both of the subdivision surfaces. And I'll just kind of re-navigate back to our character. And we'll create a cloner. So I'll just add a cloner to our scene with nothing else selected. Just like that. So now our cloner appears in the center of our scene. I'll just go ahead and add our stones now to our cloner, just to see what this is doing. So we are by default cloning in a grid. We're not going to do that. We're going to clone in a radial manner. So if we just change it from grid to radial in our mode, we're getting closer to what we want. So I just want to expand this radius a bit. And we're actually going to clone a lot of these, like a lot. And this might actually make your scene pretty heavy. And if it does, just go ahead and change it from instance to render instance. This kind of tells Cinema to optimize it. So it's kind of treating the copies of each of these as instances like we did with our grass. Meanwhile, this is basically just treating them as unique objects, which will naturally be much heavier on your computer. You can't do certain things if you have render instance activated, but for the things that we are doing, this won't really matter. So we'll go ahead and make sure that render instance is activated because that will make things easier on your performance. And once we've done that, we'll go ahead and add our random effector. So I'll have our cloner selected. I'll come up to MoGraph, effector, and then random. And that will make our rocks fly all over the place. But we'll come into parameters and we'll just zero these out and kind of dial them back one by one. So I'll just try and start pulling at these, see what these are doing. So I'll probably want to increase the Z1 quite a bit. So I want to create a lot of depth when it comes to this. And while we're doing this, we can also just take a look at how this is looking in our other view. And obviously this is way bigger than we need it to be. I'm kind of seeing that these will end somewhere around here. So I think we can both decrease the radius here and also decrease the amount. So maybe like around 60, something like that. That looks better. And I think we also can decrease the position Z here, maybe something like this. Yeah, that feels better. It's still looking a bit uniform. We can try and just activate the rotation and just rotate them along the y-axis like this. See if this is feeling any better. And what we'll do a lot is the scale randomization. So I'll go ahead and activate this. We don't want to scale each axis by themselves. So I'll go ahead and activate uniform scale, which allows us to just scale it uniformly. And if you just kind of drag these around, you can kind of see what this is doing. And I'll want to turn on absolute scale and scale them minus 0.75. So this will basically tell Cinema that I don't want it to go beyond the original scale. The randomization should happen between scale 1 and like 0.25 basically. So I'm getting some smaller pebbles, some bigger pebbles. I'm getting a lot of nice like just randomization here by not doing too much work. And once we kind of have this in place, we can hop back into our camera view. And since we have this random effector set up, we can just in the effector tab here just kind of change the seed as much as we like until we find a composition that we really enjoy. Since this is such a versatile system and we can just get a random formation just by clicking on a button, you can just sit and tinker until you find a composition that you like. I think I saw some composition that I liked somewhere around here. Maybe even I'll reduce the amount of clones because it feels a bit too much. And just kind of see, I'm seeing some of them actually intersect here. So I can actually take the entire cloner and just rotate it around and see if I find something else that I enjoy. So maybe something. We do have a lot of clones. I might just reduce it even more actually. So it's even less. So something like this, and then I might tinker around with the reason why I'm tinkering around so much with the random effector and stuff is that I think it's a bit too heavy here in the center. That's why. I might actually just randomize the x-axis a bit. See if that does anything. Maybe. Yeah, it did actually. And then I'll just hop out into our perspective view. Just see that we're not having any obvious intersections here in front, but I don't think we do. I think this is a spot that I'm actually happy with. Actually, I do see one thing that I think we can change before we wrap up the modeling part, and that is just scaling down the lower width of our cone. That is our poncho. I think it's feeling a bit too big. Even just watching it as it's animating, I think we can just tighten it up just a bit. And since that is a parametric object like a cone, that is super easy for us to change. So we can just select it, press S, which will bring it up in our objects panel. We'll go down to the actual cone like that. And we can actually just go ahead and just slightly scale it down to somewhere around there. We just want to give a bit more breathing space between our sleeve and stuff. And yeah, we don't need it to be that big. So I think around 33 does it. And let's see, let's just kind of watch the animation and just make sure that it doesn't intersect into our leg or anything. And I don't think it does. Okay, perfect. And that also means that we unfortunately need to slightly adjust the zipper and the pocket, but that is super easy. So we'll just rotate this out a bit like that, and then we'll move it back in along the local Z axis like that. And we'll do the same thing with our pocket. We'll just kind of see where it's, yeah, we'll need to rotate it out a bit like that, and then just move it back in. It doesn't need to completely touch and intersect with our poncho, because we are going to add a layer of displacement when we're texturing, and then we don't want the poncho to be like clipping through our pocket. So I'm kind of placing it a bit further out deliberately. But yeah, I think that's a place where I'm really happy. And that actually brings us to the end of the modeling part of our design process, which is very exciting. So in the next part of the course, we're going to be tackling lighting and texturing and stuff, and adding colors, and yeah, it's going to add a whole other dimension to our artwork. So that's going to be really exciting. And after that, we're going to do animation and comp on top of that. So we have a bit of a way to go, but we're definitely getting there. So yeah, I'll see you in the next part of the course.